Oh no, everyone is actually
Fine. Okay.
audible.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
So here we begin. So, yes, hello friends. I'm Gennia Nuh, the project lead of for the story project 11 by www.tellmeyourstory.biz, and I welcome you to the inaugural episode of the Letters from Santa. The project Letters from Santa is addressed to parents and children. Though Santa is a mythical figure, most of us are blessed with the participation of our parents, especially the mothers in our life who looks after us, takes care of us, fulfill our wishes and guide us to the right path. This project aims at providing insightful guidance and evoke interest in certain aspects of life that may shape the life of children better. Today, I'm privileged to have with us Shyamolima Saikia ma'am, Lopamudra ma'am, and Subi Taba ma'am this evening, and we are going to discuss children's stories from the Northeast in India. Now, let me begin with introducing the panelists. Subi Taba is a poet and writer from Bangalore. Her debut poetry collection is Dear Bohemian Man. Her short story, A Night with the Tiger, won New Asian Writing Short Story Prize 2020, and The Last Priest was shortlisted for Twist and Twain Short Story Prize 2021. She was a fellow of South Asia Speaks 2021 Literary Mentorship Program and the winner of Penguins The Perfect Pitch Mentorship Program 2023. Shyamolima Saikia currently works as an assistant professor in the Department of English, Gargaon College, Shivsagar, Assam. He has published anthologies of poems such as Palimpsest and Paper Mash Dreams. Her poems have also been published in Borderless Journal, Tista Review, Paradise on Earth, and International Anthology, to name a few. She is also the recipient of the Best Poetry Award 2020 in the Writers' Festival organized by Cape Comorin Trust. Moreover, she is the convener of the Assam Forum of the Indigenous Society for the Promotion of English Language and Literature, ISPEL. Dr. Lopamudra Maitra is a visual anthropologist, author, and columnist. She researches and publishes on history, popular culture, heritage, and communication narratives of India and South Asia. She is at the Center of Historical Studies of West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences. She is also a former culture specialist, SARC, Sri Lanka, and a former assistant professor of Symbiosis International University. She is the author of 4 books and several research papers in her area of research. So let's set sailing. May I request Subi ma'am and Shyamolima ma'am, please tell us about folk tales and regional tales that you both grew up listening to. And if possible, please do add the experience of hearing those stories. Subi ma'am?
Okay. Thank you. And I feel very honored to be in this panel. And first of all, the stories that I heard, I'll start from my childhood. The stories that I heard when I was young, I was in a very remote village in East Kaming district of Arunachal Pradesh. The stories my grandmother and my mother and my cousins, they told me were stories of Abotani. In Arunachal Pradesh, there is this group of tribes called Tani tribes, which consist of tribes namely Nishi, Adi, Apatani, Gallo, Tagin, and also which includes missing tribes from Assam. So these all tribes believe that they originated from the same forefather whose name was Abotani. So in our childhood and in our culture, all the stories that we heard, which can be called folk tales, are based on Abotani and his adventures. And Abotani, he is not just a human figure, he is more like a mythical figure. And it is told that he had many wives. The marriage with the wind wife gave uh, gave birth to monkeys. That's why monkeys look like humans, but they can glide in the skies like the wind. And he also married crocodiles and even toads. There was one particular story about toad, wife of Abotani, and how because he was not giving him much love, she self immolates herself. A story like that. And also he had many wives, which included one of the main major romantic interest he had was the daughter of the sun, which who was called Anedoni. Ane means mother. So he had that wife as well. And again, there were many adventurous stories about Abotani. He had one friend companion called Robo Pacha, and with whom he will have many notorious adventures all the time. Both these characters, they will try to pull each other down. Abotani, he, even though he enjoys his company, but he's always trying to trick him. And Robopacha also, he always wants to trick him. And the stories and the folk tales mostly have a lot of animate characters in our folk tales. There will be dogs who can speak, there will be birds who can speak, and like a dog and birds, especially like hornbills. It's also a very important part of Arunachal culture, and that is why Nisis, especially Nisis, they have this headgear where they wear hornbill beaks. Um,
Mm.
and they used to believe that hornbill shouldn't be killed. Whoever kills a hornbill gets cursed because the wife is sealed inside the wooden bark. So whoever kills a hornbill, they will have bad luck, like that. That is Abotani, and with him, in every like tribes who belong to this Tani clan, they have many variations and many slightly different ways of telling Abotani stories. And besides Abotani, we have stories which mostly consist of very supernatural and animism, animistic characters in our culture. These Tani tribes, they used to follow this Doni Poloism, if you have heard, which means sun moon god. So before Christianity and before Hinduism, in Arunachal these days, a lot of people follow Christianity and also Hinduism. But before this religion came, everyone used to follow this Doni Poloism, which is like animism religion. And Mm, and the festivals which these tribes still now which we practice follow this prayers mostly to Doni Poloism, sun moon god, because uh, Arunachal as a state, it is a very vast land, and it has the least density population in India. So a lot of tribes, they live in very far flung mountains, and because of such proximity to nature, a lot of people, especially in the villages, they are so inclined to nature, and they also believe in a lot of nature related supernatural beliefs. The priest, especially, there are still priests who follow this Doni Poloism. Still now, there are existing priests. Whenever they start their incantations, also, they always start with saluting to the sun, the moon, and even the wind, rocks, all the inanimate objects that are in nature. They used to salute it. And besides this, I'll just cite some more. One interesting um, ghost like this folktale, which most of the tribes have, is this forest spirit, which is usually called Yapam, which is like a female ghost thing existing in the forest. And if a person is under this female, forest spirit. They'll be flying, they'll be lost in the forest. Such kind of stories are also there. And one more interesting story we used to hear was about this dwarf. We used to call it migra, but it's like dwarfs who live in the highlands where humans don't live. And our grandmothers used to tell the migras, they used to hide their heart somewhere else, maybe inside the cave. And if a person can find the heart of a migra, he can own them, like Aladdin owning, genie. So
Genie.
yeah, the human can, just say anything, and then that migra will follow the humans. So these are the, village stories which I heard when I was growing up. And during after, my village experience, I shifted to boarding school. So I lived in this boarding school with lots of other girls. And every evening there were some seniors who used to sit down and tell stories. And some of the seniors were also from other, community of Arunachal. So from them, some of the stories which I remember, I'll just brief it, are like, if we there was one girl who will sit down and she'll tell, like, look at those mountains, and if you see a fire, flying across the mountains, that is the soul, spirit of the witch which escaped from her mouth when she was sleeping. So those kind of stories our seniors used to tell. And also, that common story, like our hostel was a graveyard before. So most of the stories were like this, and also there is one popular, ghost in Arunachal, which appears at night. And if we see it, it's like that ghost is the very tall ghost. It will be as tall as the skies. Mm. So these are the, kind of folk tales I grew up listening. And I was more inclined to ghostly kind of stories when I was younger. So these are the kind of stories.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Okay. Moving on to Shyamolima, ma'am. Ma'am, would you like to tell us about the folk tales and regional tales that you had grown up listening to?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Genia, for the kind introduction. And I'm indeed honored to be here in this prestigious platform provided by TMYS. My heartfelt gratitude goes to Koral Das Gupta and the team of TMYS for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Yes, as regards the folk stories and original stories, I have read a lot of stories during my childhood. The folk stories, which in Assamese are termed as Hadhukotha or the word of the saint, it means the advice of like virtuous people or the saint given to people, especially children, to teach certain moral lessons. And the most prominent of these stories are the tales, folk tales collected and compiled by Lakshminath Bezbora, Assamese author and poet of the pre-independence period. So he collected a lot of folk tales which were earlier transmitted orally from generations to generations. He collected and compiled them, and these were published in 1911 as Burhi Air Hadhu, which is translated as Grandmother's Tales. He also brought out another collection that is Koka Deuta Aru Nati Lora, which is translated as Grandfather and Grandson. So, yes, there are a lot of stories pertaining to various communities and tribes in Assam because Assam is a conglomeration of so many communities, tribes. But the prominent ones, uh, which I shall refer to, pertain to the tales of grandmother's tales, the collection compiled by Lakshminath Bezbora. And most of these stories I had read in popular children's magazine titled Ofura and Mosak. And They published these stories regularly with very beautiful illustrations, and these illustrations are still very vivid in my mind. Um, and perhaps because of these illustrations, the stories are forever, like imprinted in children's mind. And there are stories like which I can name, like Siloni Jiekor Hadhu, or the story of the kite's daughter, Tejimola, Tularu Teja, Dhura Kauri Aru Tiposi Sarai, uh, so on and so forth. And I would like to just cite one story, because since I will be telling about my experience of reading this story. So the story of the kite's daughter, or Siloni Jiekor Hadhu, is about a rich potter and his wife who do not have a son. And the potter threatens the wife that if she does not give birth to a son, he will sell her to the Nagas. And therefore she becomes afraid, and but unfortunately she again next time she gives birth to a daughter, and out of fear she sets her baby daughter adrift on the river. She puts the baby daughter in a soru. Soru in Assamese is a kind of utensil for cooking rice. So she puts the baby daughter adrift on the river in that soru, and somehow Kite rescues the baby daughter and raises brings up the daughter lovingly. And in due course of time, the Kite marries, gives the daughter in marriage to a rich merchant. And this merchant has already 7 wives. And when the new bride comes to the family, the other wives become jealous of the new bride. They make her do all the household works. But the kite's daughter is not able to do all the work, and she calls her mother, the kite, to help her. The kite comes and performs some magic and helps her daughter to perform the household works. Uh, Again, due to the plotting of the other wives, the kite is at one time killed. So the kite is killed by the other wives, and one day they also try to sell the wife to a trader. But over a period of time, the merchant is able to find her back, and he brings her back to the home, and he finds out how the other wives had tried to kill her, and therefore he gives them a punishment. He kills all his wives except the seventh wife, because she was not part of the plot. And the story ends with the merchant living happily with the kite's daughter and the seventh wife. So this is just one story, and there are also other stories like Teji Mola, which is quite interesting. Now, regarding my experience of reading these stories when I was a child, like any other child, I was like full of wonder and awe reading these stories, and what I wanted to know was to uh, uh, get a better idea of the world of the supernatural, or the mystery of the unknown, the world of fantasy, the world of animals. So these inquisitiveness led me to read more books, read more stories, and I always look forward to like reading these stories, which would end in a happy kind of ending, which would resolve all the obstacles and complexities. But over the years, my perception regarding these stories has changed. And as I have given this example of the story of the kite's daughter, or take the example of the story of Teji Mola, where we find that Teji Mola, the young girl, is quite like tortured by her stepmother. So there might be like instances of violence that I see as an adult now, and which maybe as a child I did not notice. Maybe I enjoyed them. So these are the differences that I find. When I was a child, I enjoyed the stories, But now I find that there might be certain aspects of violence, or there might be aspects of patriarchal values steeped in the narrative, or there are again the practice of polygamy that is found in most of the stories. So there is a necessity to retell these stories, and yes, nowadays contemporary researchers have done a lot of study regarding these stories, and they have tried to retell these stories, reimagine these stories. And I would also like to mention a movie, an Assamese movie adaptation of these folk tales, which is titled Kotha Nodi, and it is directed by Bhaskar Hajarika, and it has won many awards. And this movie is like a reimagining of or retelling of the folk stories. It tries to bring out that violent aspect of these stories, or the uh, or other aspects which are like not apparent when we read it in a book or hear it as a child. So these experiences have been quite shocking as an adult. So when we grow up, when we look back at these stories, there is a different kind of perspective that we take up. So these are my experiences in a very brief manner.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your experience and also the rich collection of tales that you told us. Thank you so much. Now, coming to Lopamudra, ma'am, we would love to hear how was your experience of collecting these folk tales from the northeastern belts for your book titled "The Owl Delivered the Good News All Night Long: Folk Tales, Legends, and Modern Lore of India." Ma'am, you are muted. Yes,
Sorry
ma'am.
for that. Right. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the invitation, and absolutely wonderful to share this evening platform with very my colleagues from so many vast disciplines, and it's always very nice to listen and understand so many points of views, and so many things have already been spoken about. They are so close to my heart, and as an anthropologist, when I go out into the field exploring so many parts of narrative, these are all the things actually which often go through my head. And absolutely right, Shyamolima, when you mentioned that now as adults, when one looks at the same stories, they do not seem to have the same enchanting glamour, if I can say so, that as kids we used to have. And once we start re-looking, unfortunately, that's a very unfortunate state of mind, but it's something that you really can't do without. Every time now that I try to look at folk tales, there are so many parts of it to look at that you can't really let that go out of your head. So, but other than that, also there is so much of things like stories of migration, parts of history which is not in the pages of mainstream history books. One practically cannot find them in mainstream history book pages. Stories about certain parts of women's lives, uh, which cannot be found anywhere else, which are hidden as subtext within these stories. All stories, so to say, not only particular part of the world, but all folk tales for that matter. My experience, as far as these folk tales for this particular book is concerned, it began as a fantastic journey in 2018. But unfortunately, a year into it, the entire world almost shut down with the pandemic. And thereby came a humongous task of completing the entire thing and finally publishing it after that quite horrible summer of April and May 2021. I didn't know that the book would be out in a couple of months' time. Neither did my publisher in 2021 when the whole of India was in quite a mess in April, May, June. So we somehow, but thanks to the wonderful support team, my editor and her team over there, the fantastic illustrator who has done the work of the cover. By the way, the cover of the book, Genia, if you can put up the cover, I would really like to highlight it. This specific cover is a accumulation of all the stories of Northeast India, told through the Gond art of Central India. And this is something I really liked when, in spite of all the horrible time of the lockdowns and the pandemic, when the book was out to be released and the illustrator did this wonderful work. So there was hope that this will be something. How I managed to reach till here is something that also has a place in anthropology, is completely dedicated as digital ethnography. And this is how I have reached till the publication stage, utilizing all imaginable kinds of technological devices and channels to reach out to people, collecting the data. It was a huge task. There were lockdowns, there were people moving from place to place, there were no connectivity, zero connectivity of internet. There were phone call dropping all the time, which we still encounter every day almost. So it was a mess practically. And looking back, probably now when I look back, it kind of feels that the final product, people liked it, really admired the work. So the hard work really paid off. So that's how I would fondly like to remember it. But when we were going through it, it was a very difficult phase. So what started as physical interaction was completely taken over by the digital world. And somewhere it really teaches you that physical interactions are needed in spite of all online things and telephone calls and video calls. You need to speak to people face to face. A lot of things also comes in the way. When we are talking to people, you get to see the body language, intonation, the face structure, features, everything. So that all adds to the storytelling. Any narration, not only a story, that all completely cuts off. And a very important thing is the environment in which a narration is being told. Something which I wanted to point out, and I put it in my introduction of the book, that the environment matters a lot. And in the earlier times, a lot of choice of environment was done. Say, for example, a particular evening around a fire, or after a hard day's work, around a circle to listen to a story, or to generally sit and chat. It does help, the physical interaction does help to create a certain ambience. That also exhibits a very different approach towards all narrative. And then the dialogues which starts happening between all the people present is something else altogether. So the give and take of every dialogue is very different at that point of time. So the environment again goes completely missing in a digital format. So, yes, to cut a long story short, it was very difficult. I wish it would not have been so, but we managed to pull through, and technology helped to whatever extent it can. And of course, the wonderful helping hand of so many great people. They are not all from academics. Many of my people who have contributed, they are not from academics. I particularly wanted to put it that way. They all helped. Everyone helped, everyone chipped in. So I'm very grateful, very thankful to everyone. So there are 60 people, translators and authors, who have helped me for this project. Everyone is did a great, wonderful job. It's all thanks to them, I would say, at the end of the day.
Yes, the book cover looked absolutely enchanting against the black background. The colors were
Absolutely.
vibrant. It
Very
was a
vibrant.
stunning thing. Yes. So now let's move on to the next session. That is, let's means coming to the learning values of the folk tales. I would like to reach out very specific questions to specific people. So starting with Subi ma'am, ma'am, what do the stories say about the people and culture of the belt? If you can cite a few examples.
Mhm. Okay, the folk tales from I'll be just specific to my state, Arunachal. Yeah, the folk tales from Arunachal have uh, a very different flavor from rest of Northeast. Maybe because Arunachal, it's the largest state in Northeast and it has a lot of forest coverage. If you ever visit Arunachal, you'll see mountains everywhere. If we travel to Kerala, we see coconut trees everywhere. I mean, coconut trees is the limit in Kerala. So in Arunachal, if you ever visit, mountains are the limit. When I was young, if I had to travel from this district to that district, I used to end up being travel sick, looking at the mountains. And I used to say, "Oh, I'm so sick of these mountains. I'll look at the mountains, the roads snaking through the mountains, and I'll get travel sick. It used to take around 12 hours for us to get from Itanagar to my home district. And by the time I reached, I was completely like completely off with travel sickness. So the first thing which you will observe in every folk tale of Arunachal is the mountains. There will be like characters living in mountains in small villages. So the very important element is in a way nature. There will be nature related ghost. There will be like some trees which are ghost. There will be some animals like this monkeys living in large groves of bamboo trees. One of my relative who went to a mountain, he was chased by monkeys, and he was telling that there is ghost there as well. And when we are living, even now when I was young, in our village there was no electricity. So when you're living in a mountain and it's all dark, people in the village, they sleep as early as 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And when I'm in Itanagar, we live in Itanagar. When we are here, there is cars, taxis, cars honking every time. But when we go to the village, I feel afraid to even go out to go out for bathroom, because it's so airy. There is like so much silence, and you can hear the owls hooting, and then the animals crying, so everything feels so scary. And even as a simple tree looks like a ghost in the villages. I remember one instance when I fled from home to watch Kahona Pyar Hai with one of my cousin in the village, and when we were coming back, there was no electricity. We had to travel from the headquarter to our village, which was around 6 kilometers, and we came back on foot. And that night, I remember every tree looked like ghost. I thought I'll die before I reach home, eaten by the ghost. So, nature in a way, it's a very important element of every folktale in Arunachal. And also, the second is survival, skills. In every folktale of Arunachal, it's not every, but most of the folktales, there the main character might be a hunter. The hunter hunting for the tiger, or hunter, going to the mountains, getting lost. So lot of survival skills is in a way discussed, reflected in the characters. my short story also, A Night with the Tiger. It's also based on not exactly a folktale, but my mom once told me, like, there was a man who went hunting and he encountered a tiger in a cave, like that cave was where the tiger used to sleep, and the man didn't know. So because that man entered the tiger's territorial area, that is how, he ended up being trapped in the cave, and he burned everything he wore, like his clothes, his wooden bamboo basket, and even his hair, I heard, to survive, because he knew that the tiger was afraid of fire. So survival skill is one of the element of folk stories. Also familial values in many folk tales. I'll just give one example. There's famous folk tale called Dojang Yapam. So in this folk tale, the Yapam, which is mm, a female ghost, like Churel, she marries the brother, and she conspires the brother to kill his wife. So in a way, the main theme of the story was a brother, not trusting and not loving his sister after coming in influence with a ghost. So familial values are very much mm, evident in most of the stories. And also, maybe because it's part of the culture, in our tribe we have this joint family. These days it's not very prevalent, but in the village, just a generation, above ours, people used to live in long bamboo houses. Like, first son will have their separate fireplace, and they will have separate place for sleeping and eating. And then the second son will have the next fireplace, and the third will have the third fireplace. So the house was a really long house, and all the blood brothers and all the family members from the same clan, or even brothers, son, cousins, they all used to live in the same house. And in some cases, the house ended up becoming as long as 40-50 meters, just a long house. And this kind of houses, I actually visited one of my colleagues village, in a village called Peck. It's in Papumpare district in Sagale. His father's home, it's really long, like it was around 50 meters, and they all had separate fireplaces where their separate families used to cook. So because of this, I think, because our stories also reflect our culture, a lot of stories have this, a lot of familial values and connection, where families, the story will be mostly about a father and son, or a mother and daughter, that kind of thing. And also, like Saikia ma'am also said about polygamy in Arunachal. I think among all the states of India, I think Arunachal is the only state which still practices, polygamy in the form of polygamy. Still there are, people who are marrying. Probably this will change after a few generations, but in old times, people used to marry more than 2-3 wives, because the population was very less, and people had the survival, the only means of survival was agriculture. And some tribes, they used to live in mountains where they can't grow like wet rice cultivation, like so they has to do jum cultivation. And to do a jum cultivation on its own, it's a very tough thing. So they used to have more wives, so that they can distribute responsibilities and do agricultural works together. So that is one of the reason. And one of the other element is the presence of priest and the characters were mostly afraid of priestly figures. The priests, they were capable of um, putting curse also. The priests were also capable of um, mm, uh, uh, predicting a lot of calamities like that. So most of the communities were really scared and looked up to priests, and during those times the priest had a really important role in a society. And some of the parents from the villages, they even prevented their children to do further studies because they wanted them to be priests. And I have this practical example of one of my dad's friend. My dad, he chose to study, and he ended up becoming a teacher in university. And his friend also was a good student, but he didn't study because his parents wanted him to become priest. So he ended up staying in the village, and he just became like that. Means his life didn't grew much. He got stagnant. And when I visit the village 2 years back, I met one of my father's friend, and he was telling me, I feel so shy to talk to your father because he was my friend, and now he's become very big and there's an officer, but I'm just staying like this, so I feel so shy to talk to him like that. I was your father's friend. So that is one thing. And besides all this, I think the folk tales from Arunachal and the stories has a certain element of obscureness, because we don't have written history like other states like Assam. Our neighboring state, they have at least some written records, but our tribes, we don't have any written records these days. Anthropologists and historians are doing some researches. We don't have particular a book written by people from our written by people who are our ancestors. And in fact, some orators used to tell that our tribes who migrated from mm, the Tibetan, kingdom, because a fallout happened between the Tibetan king and the non Buddhist believers. They migrated, and on the way of migration, I don't know how true is that. It seems some of our history was written in the leather of some animal, and on the way, because people were migrating and they were hungry, they built fire and burned the leather and ate the history. So these are the some of the elements that you can find in folktales from Arunachal.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, coming to ma'am Shyamolima, ma'am, I would like to ask you, how do the stories introduce the climate and nature of the northeastern belt? If you would give some examples, it would be obviously great ones.
Yes, right. Regarding how these stories introduce the climate, first of all, I would say that there is no such like direct references to the climate, uh, but we can say that there are references to changing seasons, or like the hot months or the wet seasons, rains, the blossoming of trees, or the ripening of crops, or for instance, the dust storms. And of course, since these stories are set in very ancient times, definitely there are no issues of like problems of climate change as we witness today. And yes, I can give one example. We can take the example of the story of the quarrel between the wind and the sun. So it has references to sun, certain like dust storms, or um, like the hot season or the hot months. Yes, maybe in that manner we can find references to the climate. But most of all, most of these stories are like set in the rural background, and there is a pleasant climate, as we can assume, from these stories. And coming to nature, yes, there's a great, there's a very deep relationship between men and nature that is reflected in these stories. And nature is seen to be much better than the ugliness of men. I can just give one example, that is the story of Tejimola, where we find the character Tejimola transforming from one being to another, taking the form of a plant, or maybe taking the form of um, a tree. So, just to narrate briefly the story. So, Tejimola is a young girl whose stepmother tries to kill her uh, in a fit of jealousy, and she kills her with a rice pounding tool, which in Assamese language is called a dheki. And she kills her, and she buries the body in the uh, backyard. And from the piece of earth where she is buried, Tejimola re-emerges and takes another form. Uh, she takes the form of a bottle gourd plant, and but soon the stepmother comes to know that she is alive, and she destroys the plant. And again, from the remains of the plant, Tejimola comes back to life again in the form of another tree, that is a citrus tree. And eventually, um, the father is able to recognize Tejimola in the form of that, in the form of a lotus later on. From a tree, she transforms herself into a lotus, and her father recognizes her one day, and he tells her that if you want to prove your identity, you have to transform yourself into a sparrow. So in this story, particular story, we find how she goes transformation from one form to another, from a human being to a plant, to a tree, and then to a lotus, and again to she returns back to the human form. So somehow this story shows the deep relation between human and nature, and it shows how Tejimola is helped by nature in every difficulty that she faces in her life. Uh, I would also like to give another example of a missing folk tale, though there are a lot of other stories. Since there is a shortage of time, I can't cite other so many examples. So the missing folk tale is titled Petukari Sormon Doing, which is translated as the river dolphin and crocodile. And in this particular story, there is a very beautiful and efficient girl who is called Tamang, and she lives along the banks of the Subansiri River. And Subansiri River is a tributary of the Brahmaputra, as we know. And as Tamang grows up, her parents decides to get her married, and they start making the preparation. But Tamang already has a lover, and she is confused as to whether she should betray her parents. And out of fear, she tries to take her life. She tries to jump into the river Subansiri, but she knows that she can swim and she will not die. Anyhow, she jumps into the river, and what she does is that she ties a kind of pestle or a Ural rod, which is called a rod, and a mortar in her body. And due to the mortar, she is carried deep down into the river, and gradually she is transformed into a dolphin because of the uh, pestle which she um, ties around her neck. Her neck grows bigger, and her stomach also enlarges, and she is transformed into a dolphin. And she begins to live in the river. Then her lover continues to search for her, and he doesn't find her. He also tries to end his life, and he also ties a kind of stone into his body, and he jumps into the same river. And he's also transformed into a crocodile. And due to this story, there is a kind of belief among the missing people, missing community people, that we should not like kill the dolphins or kill the crocodile. And therefore, this story carries a message that we should conserve the river dolphin, which is known as hihu in Assamese, and the dolphin has become endangered. And therefore, this story carries a very good message of conserving nature, of conserving animals. So, and there are a lot of stories. Like we have stories from the Dimasa community, from the Boro. The Boros have their own tales, folk tales, the Rabhas. So all these communities have these folk stories which incorporate animals as characters, and give try to give moral lessons. Somehow, it tries to they try to show the relation between man and nature, or man and animals, man and the animal world. And of course, we have the tribes which try to uphold um, the idea that we should conserve nature, we should preserve nature. So there are a lot of other examples. I have only cited these two. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. That was very, very, very good explanation, and I loved the stories. Yes. Now, coming to Lopamudra, ma'am, that given that you do not originate from the region, how did these stories impact you when you heard them for the first time?
Right. Something that actually needs to be spoken about. I mean, practically should be highlighted about all the stories of all the places of Northeast India is the great connection with nature in various ways, which both Subi and Shyamolima has already spoken about. And this, at the very beginning, it actually one doesn't need to even go into the depth of the subtext of a story to really understand what it is trying to convey. I mean, it is that prominent. The presence of nature is that prominent in all of the stories that comes your way. Any of them, you just pick up one and you start reading it, and it will come your way. Now, once you start, in fact, going through them deeper into them, there are some very wonderful aspects that really are also fascinating, and probably I'll speak about a couple of that which really made me I mean, if I still sit and think about it, it is really something quite wonderful, and that goes for one or two story I would really like to speak about. There is one specific tale from Nagaland, which is about this lady Songmo, and the story basically is about her and the tree spirit, which was in love with her. And she was the daughter of a very wealthy person, a very respectable, wealthy person in the village. And there were many suitors coming to marry her, but the father didn't agree to any of them. And finally, there was a decision of putting up a wind chime to really see that somebody was creeping into her room every night. To catch that man, there was a decision of putting up a wind chime. And the next morning, when it was not there, and it was searched all over the place, all over the village, there was no trace of the wind chime. And suddenly, there was this huge banyan tree right in front of her room, in her garden, in the campus of her house. They saw the wind chime hanging high up in the branches, very high in the branches of the tree. It was understood that no man can actually hang a wind chime up there, so it is the tree spirit who is visiting her. And thereby, the father was furious and locked the girl in. and gave orders to cut the tree down. And many people tried, they just could not do it. And finally, at one point of time, the girl was listening all the while of the men cutting down, the trying to cut down the tree, and it was making a very strange, eerie, ghostly sound. But it was not cutting. I mean, they were trying their best, but it was not falling down, basically. So the minute she peeped through a part of the wall, a small splinter from the wood flew and hit her eye so badly she went blind in one eye. And immediately the tree crashed down and practically breathed its last. So then the people, the entire village community cut the tree into small pieces. Every community took part of the wood and built up their localities in different places. And it is still considered that's how the houses, the settlements began to spread from that place with the blessings of the tree migrating into every place. And that's how the life of people began in houses, built houses of wood. And that specific tribe also has a story that it is still believed that every generation will have a blind person, and that's the curse, and that's the thing that is continuing from the uh, times immemorial because of the tree spirit. So that's what happened to that the songmo in the story. So this basically, this story entirely, it's so wonderful to see that the connection of the present time and the connection of the dispersal of settlement, but with the blessing, it's almost like the blessing of nature, that that's where they began, and that's where the settlement started to come in. And it did create a friction between, of course, the tree spirit passed away, they died, but they still nevertheless managed to survive, and that's where the settlement began. Now, this kind of friction is very prominent in many of the stories of Northeast India. There is another very interesting story about a brother and a sister who basically turns into cutting a long story short, into elephants. And why? Because they go over to have a bath in a certain waterfall which was practically reserved for the elephants only. They didn't listen. They have a bath there, small kids, and they gradually, over a very brief period of time, turn into elephants themselves. And they had to be sent off to the jungle by the entire family and the village as well. Now, see the thing that it is always mentioned, the story at the very beginning, that don't go there. It's for the elephants. They come there, they drink their water. The whole thing is reserved almost for them. When you trespass that boundary, when you cross over, it's almost like the sanctity. You are crossing over the sanctity, and thereby you become part of nature. Whether you consider that to be a punishment for humans, yes, a punishment, or you learn to adapt more to nature, that's why you become an elephant yourself, become part of nature. So either way, that's up to the audience to decide. But see the reflection of the sanctity, the demarcation of sanctity, the boundaries, and these kind of friction through the stories are on and off reflected. There are so many stories which I find very fascinating about the woman specifically turning into tigers, tigresses, if I can speak it up about like that. And they have cubs also, and sometimes they are not allowed in the village. The village is protected by fences. So the poor mother, a human mother of the woman who has turned into that animal, weeps for her, but can't really have her daughter back. So there is a continuous tussle for that. But a woman who might be having certain exceptional other qualities, who may shun men, may also face the wrath of the society. That's where I found some of the stories also tries to reflect. It's also somewhere a friction of the patriarchal as well as the woman's point of view coming at a tussle between each other. That woman who is free to make her own choice, her own decisions, will be shunned so badly that she will not be allowed and not accepted so easily back into her household. If she has child out of wedlock, if she chooses to be a single mother and such other things, it will be not an easy life for her. The family will suffer, they will weep and silently weep, but they will not be accepted. So yes, these are also tussles which are there, and to think about that these stories are basically very old. You really can't put an yardstick for any of them. And to think about that even old such folk tales have such narratives also shows that somewhere people have been thinking about these things, that probably there is a friction going on between man and nature. Probably what is happening to an XYZ lady or a woman is not right. The whole villager is not doing justice towards a certain individual. So all of these thinking were there, and it's excellent. It's almost like reading in a newspaper which is oral. So newspaper that speaks about those mentalities, those expressions, and just puts it in front of you. So that's the most fascinating thing. And all of these stories, they have always been a very great learning experience. So for me, specifically for this book, also all of them. I mean, if you ask me, I spoke about Songmo, yes, but specifically, I would also like to speak about, there is this in Arunachal, there is this method of herbal fishing, and one of the stories actually speaks about how herbal fishing became a part of the Galo community. So we have spoken about it in the as a traditional Galo knowledge system, how herbal fishing came to be. So that also will put up a question: exactly what is herbal fishing to any reader? Say for that. So probably nowadays, obviously, you can Google it up and see, but it's always a learning experience. Even an audience will get to know what exactly is herbal fishing. So they are all learning experiences, and I hope the all the readers can actually find out more, and it may encourage them more to read up on Northeast India. They are all beautiful stories. All of them are wonderful to even not maybe not to think about like me, I so much, but even if you just browse through the stories, they are all beautiful stories.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a really insightful experience that you shared with us, the kind of knowledge that you have also gained from reading this Northeastern stories and obviously collecting them in an anthology. Thank you so much. Now, due to the shortage of time, I would cut it short and ask you one question that is common for you three. That is, I would request you to share your reading advice for children that would actually tell them about the rich culture and heritage of the northeastern belts in India. Let's start. Let me start with Subi, ma'am. Then,
Um, you mean a suggestion of books?
yes, ma'am. That would actually expose the northeastern culture, the rich heritage, and the means whatever that will expose the other children to the northeastern region of India, which is so unexplored yet now, till now as of.
Um, there are many good writers, and there are many good books from Northeast. If I mean, if according to my memory, like sometimes I'm very forgetful, but I'll just start with writers from Nagaland. Since I studied there, I read a lot of Esterin Kire books. So if you read she has written books which is historical fiction of Nagaland, as well as magical realism sort of stories based in Nagaland. So those books someone can read. If I can recall the title of the books, there was one book called Mary, there was Bitter Wormwood, there was mm, a Son of Thunderstorm, I think, and And also when the river sleeps, that story is really good. And that story, I feel like it has really uh, encapsulated the magical realism thing about, a folk culture of Nagaland. I really love that book, When the River Sleeps, from Arunachal. mm, you can read books by um, Warrior Irwin, like the philosophy of Nepa. One can start with that to get an overview of Arunachal. He also wrote this folk tales and myths from Northeast India, which is also very good. And Mamang Dai also has written books, Legends of Pensam. It has like it reflects the Adi culture and the British colonial times so well in the small, town of East Siang. Yeah, that.
This.
Yeah, she has also written The Black Hill, and the recent one, what was that? Escaping the Land. So I have all the books, so one can read about them. And also one more the famous writer, Sahitya Academy awardee from Arunachal is Vaidi Tongchi. He also has written a lot of books, mostly in Assamese, which some of which are being translated into English. Mhm. In Assam, I have come across a lot of good writers. Like I actually read more of like Aruni Kashyap because he was mentoring me for the South Asia Speaks. So I was reading a lot of his books. But I will leave that suggestions for Assam part for maybe Saikia ma'am. And besides that, just in general, I really look up to Janice Period from Shillong. She has really good, language and such beautiful literature. It's not just about Northeast. Her writings are, good for anyone in worldwide. Mm. So for now, those are the books just coming in my mind.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Shamulima ma'am, if you could give your experience as to which books would cater to the children so that they can explore the northeastern region of India better.
Yes, I have already mentioned Lakshminath Bezbara's works such as The Grandmother's Tales and Koka Teuta Aru Natilora, which have been translated into English as well. And nowadays we have a lot of videos as well, which depicts these stories. Children can uh, watch these videos as well. And we also have writers like uh, Nirmal Prabha Bordoloi, then Navakanto Borua, who have written a lot of stories in Assamese uh, for children. So children can read them as well. And coming to contemporary writers, we have writers like Rashmi Narjari, uh, who has written for children, and Ruba Hajarika. Um, so a lot of like writers are there who have dealt with children's fiction, and this can be taken as books to learn more about the Northeast, especially Assam. So I don't exactly remember the names, but they can look up the names by with reference to these writers I mentioned. So that's it from my side.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Lopamudra, ma'am, if you could give a few means if you could list a few books that could be beneficial for the children to currently
Right.
read.
Actually, Subi and Shyamolima made quite distinctive mentions, and I think I should add one or two which might be helpful. The people, the contributors in my book, in spite of all the problem, I wanted to also make the reader have a reference if they just in case wants to have a further reading. from any of the story that they are reading. So what I did was also compile an entire bibliography behind my book. So that's not only Northeast India, but the rest of it also. And what has happened from that is that they are not all of them are not English works. So a lot of them are regional works also. Some have been translated into English, but of course, if one knows the language, one can always pick up a reference and read it. And there are age old references also, which Subi had mentioned earlier about Elvin's work. And I can add one more pointer to that is A.K. Ramanujan's work of Folk Tales of India. And these are available in English, of course. And but there are so many wonderful effort of people. A small thing that immediately comes to my mind is that NCRT has a lot of children's book at very low prices and beautifully illustrated for very young children also. They are not expensive. They make great gifts. I make it a point to give gifts of books to kids anytime, even now. So they actually make very lovely gifts also because the illustrations are so beautiful. And also they can be bought by any kid, keeping in mind the access, any audience. So a lot of these stories are also through the illustrated pages of these children's books. So one can definitely also go through it, and they are very easily available. These children's illustrated books, NCRT books, and all. And of course, the very hard work of all the 60 people, all the translators and the authors, they really also put in a lot of efforts, starting from encyclopedias to very basic work in regional literature. They are also listed in my book at the back as references. So if one can just pick up or maybe browse through it, you will have a fair idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that was the end, and thank you all for the insightful conversation and for your time this evening. Uh, yes. On an ending note, let me tell the viewers. Tell me your story. Calls for submissions on the story prompt. Letters from Santa. Registrations are open. Also for the writing program season 9. We hope to hear from you. Till then, stay well, stay happy, stay together. Good night. Thank you.